She stood there, pregnant in front of hundreds, and he didn't even look at her. Every smile she had ever trusted now belonged to someone else. Her chest tightened, tears burned behind her eyes, and in that moment, Elizabeth Harper realized how completely she had been abandoned. If you've ever been replaced, ignored, or made to feel invisible, this moment will feel painfully familiar. Elizabeth Harper walks into a grand gala, expecting respect, only to be publicly abandoned by her ex-husband while his mistress thrives, turning her life into a spectacle of humiliation. Elizabeth's heels clicked against the marble floor, each step sharper than the last. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and mirrored walls, but the brilliance only highlighted her isolation. Gregory Stanton, her ex-husband, sat at the head table, composed and deliberately avoiding her gaze. No nod, no smile, nothing. She felt the sting of years erased in a heartbeat. Vivian Cross moved through the crowd, commanding attention with effortless grace. She leaned toward a group of investors and said softly, cuttingly, "She doesn't belong here anymore." The words landed like a punch. Elizabeth froze. A waiter brushed past her, tipping a drop of champagne onto her gown. Eyes flicked toward her, whispers followed. Her cheeks flamed, and her breath caught. Elizabeth pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the baby inside, a fragile anchor in the storm. A single tear escaped, and she quickly brushed it away. Her body trembled slightly, the helplessness of the moment pressing down, her confidence shaken. She allowed herself to sink into that weight for a few seconds, letting herself be real, human, broken. Then, through the haze of embarrassment, her eyes caught tiny clues in Vivian's smile and timing. A brief hesitation, a glance lingering too long, a micro-expression that wasn't meant for public eyes. These small details barely registered but stirred her attention. Elizabeth's heart still pounded, her breath came short, but her mind slowly picked up on these subtle signals without yet forming a plan. She exhaled slowly, touched her stomach, whispering, "I can't let this completely crush me." Fear and humiliation burned, but beneath it, a quiet spark refused to go out. The panic, the shame, the helplessness. They were real, but they were alive, giving her a raw, undeniable connection to herself, her child, and what she could endure. Her phone buzzed. A message made her stomach drop. Gregory had secretly altered the trust protecting her unborn child. The public humiliation was only the beginning. Something inside her refused to go quiet. If you've ever felt invisible in a room you deserve to belong, this will feel all too real. Vivian Cross doesn't just charm. She controls, making Elizabeth feel small without a single raised voice. Elizabeth stepped into the main hall after being introduced, but instead of being acknowledged, she was positioned subtly to the side, slightly behind the main group. The spotlight of attention wasn't on her. It was on Vivian, standing tall in the center, laughing lightly with investors. A photograph would later show Vivian perfectly framed at the center of the room, Elizabeth almost invisible in the periphery. It was quiet, and it hurt. Elizabeth felt her chest tighten. She pressed her hand lightly to her stomach, feeling the baby move. The quiet awareness of her pregnancy made the humiliation sting more, but it also grounded her. Her posture became still, controlled, as if holding herself together through sheer will. Vivian's presence dominated the space. Every glance from investors, every nod and laugh, gravitated toward her. She spoke softly to a nearby board member. "Some people are better suited for the background." The cruelty of the line wasn't loud, but it landed directly on Elizabeth, confirming the hierarchy had been rewritten without ceremony or confrontation. Elizabeth's lips pressed together. She took a slow breath. The quiet humiliation was sharp, sinking in deep. Elizabeth began noticing small things. Tiny clues in Vivian's smile and timing, the slight shift of her weight, a glance toward Gregory that lingered. She didn't analyze, didn't strategize yet. She just felt it. The way the room was arranged told her everything. Every investor's smile toward Vivian, every approving nod, confirmed the subtle but total control her rival held in this space. Her chest tightened further. She whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else, I won't be invisible forever. The room remained dominated by Vivian, the attention skewed, the social hierarchy clear, but Elizabeth felt it deep inside. The quiet fire, the awareness that nothing here was permanent, and that she was still present, still human, still resisting in the smallest ways. A discreet message buzzed on her phone. Elizabeth's eyes widened. Vivian had drafted a plan to seize full control of her unborn child's inheritance. The room's subtle cruelty was only the beginning. Something inside Elizabeth refused to go quiet. If you've ever trusted a system that was supposed to protect you, this will feel like a punch in the chest. Beneath the Empire's polished surface, machinery of betrayal had quietly taken over, leaving Elizabeth Harper stunned and powerless. Elizabeth returned to her office after the gala, still reeling from the public humiliation. A stack of documents had been left for her, and as she opened the top folder, her eyes went wide. This trust fund, the one designated to protect her child's future, had been quietly altered. One division's project allocations had shifted, redirecting resources she had depended on for years. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages, realizing how far the system had already moved against her. Every change was silent, precise, deliberate. She sank into her chair, pressing a hand to her stomach. The baby moved, a faint reminder of life and responsibility amid the chaos. Her chest tightened as the full weight of the betrayal hit her. This wasn't one careless mistake, it was a coordinated restructuring. Lawyers, compliance officers, board advisors, and the finance team had all played a part, each quietly following instructions that systematically reduced her control. It was invisible to the outside world, yet the impact was enormous. Elizabeth felt the disbelief settle like a heavy fog. How could so many people, all meant to uphold the rules, quietly rearrange the foundations of her life without alerting her? Each page she read revealed another quiet shift. Asset transfers redirected, decisions made without notice, approvals bypassed. The machinery of betrayal moved fast, silently, efficiently. She pressed her hand harder to her stomach, holding herself upright against the wave of helplessness. The room seemed to close in around her. Every familiar corner of her office, every stack of files she had once considered secure, now felt like a trap. Her mind kept returning to the same question. How far had it already gone? Every folder she opened added to the answer. The changes were extensive, systematic, and far more complete than she could have imagined. The sheer scale of the damage left her breath short and her chest tight. A quiet anger began to rise beneath the disbelief. Not a heroic anger yet, not a call to action. Just the raw recognition that she had been removed from control, reduced to watching as decisions that would affect her child and her future were made without her consent. Her eyes filled with quiet tears, and she allowed herself to feel the full depth of betrayal, the weight of being blindsided by the very structures meant to protect her. She sat back, exhaling slowly, her hands resting over her belly. The system had moved against her with such precision that she could hardly believe it. The lawyers, advisors, and finance team had acted silently, invisibly, but the consequences were immediate and profound. Every account, every trust, every allocation touched by the system now carried the mark of exclusion. Elizabeth's lips pressed together, her jaw tight. The quiet fear, the disbelief, and the simmering anger mingled into a heavy, controlled pulse. She didn't speak. She didn't plan. She simply let herself feel it. The depth of the betrayal, the injustice, and the realization of how completely her influence had been stripped away. A confidential email arrived, confirming that a key board member had been bribed to approve the new allocations. Elizabeth's eyes widened as she absorbed the news. The betrayal was not just subtle, it was systemic, far-reaching, and personal. She sat back, holding herself and her child close, quiet and stunned, knowing the machinery had won. For now. If you've ever felt like the world could strike the ones you love most, this will hit home. Elizabeth Harper's pregnancy becomes a target, turning her maternal instinct into both vulnerability and invisible leverage. Elizabeth sat at her desk, shoulders tense, hand pressed over her stomach. The baby kicked softly, a tiny pulse of life she had to protect. The corporate world, she realized with a cold pang, no longer measured her by her talent or intelligence. It measured her by her vulnerability. The audit reports lay in front of her. This trust fund had been altered, one division's project reassigned, and one account redirected without notice. The full weight of the changes pressed down on her chest. She pressed her hand over her belly again, feeling the baby stir nervously, a quiet reminder of what was at stake. Elizabeth's chest tightened as fear surged. She could feel her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Lawyers, board advisors, compliance officers, and finance teams had quietly rearranged authority and assets, leaving her influence minimal. She breathed shallowly, pressing her shoulders back, holding posture against the quiet pressure. Her eyes stung. "I can't let anything happen to you," she whispered softly. Her mind flashed brief, sharp images. Hospital room, empty cradle, court hallway, silence. Each image made her chest squeeze tighter, each flash a reminder of the stakes beyond herself. The panic rose in her, but she didn't move, didn't act. She felt it fully, held herself steady, and kept her hands over her child. Elizabeth exhaled slowly, pressing her hands firmly to her belly. Every changed document, every silent exclusion now carried weight against her unborn child. The fear, the panic, the protectiveness, they were intertwined, raw and immediate. The quiet anger simmered beneath, but she let the emotion exist fully without forcing it into action. A confidential alert appeared on her laptop. Unauthorized changes had been made to the Sterling Trust, directly threatening her unborn child. The room felt colder, the silence heavier, and Elizabeth realized the battle was no longer only about her. It was about protecting a life that could be used against her. Fear and protectiveness intertwined, and for the first time, she understood how personal this fight had become. If you've ever realized someone you trusted could turn on you, this will feel painfully familiar. Elizabeth Harper has to navigate a world where no one may truly be on her side. Elizabeth sank into her chair, her hand over her stomach. The city lights outside did nothing to ease the tight knot in her chest. She dialed the first number she thought she could trust. The familiar voice answered warmly, "Elizabeth, I'm in your corner." Relief rushed through her briefly, but then the words she overheard later at the gala made her stomach twist. The same voice had smiled at Vivian, confirming loyalties elsewhere. Her chest tightened further. Even someone who had once promised protection, someone she had defended in board disputes, had quietly shifted to the opposing camp. Half-truths, convenient omissions, subtle nods at meetings. Everything that had once meant security now felt like betrayal. The same person who had once whispered encouragement now quietly undermined her, leaving Elizabeth stunned, isolated, and aching. She pressed her hands lightly to her belly, feeling the baby stir as if sensing the tension. The heartbreak wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, corrosive, and personal. Every call that promised help now echoed in her mind as a reminder that even apparent allies could not be trusted. She recalled a meeting months ago where the same person had vowed, "I'll always have your back." The memory made her eyes sting. How quickly trust could collapse. Elizabeth's chest heaved softly. She stared at the dimly lit office, trying to steady herself. She felt the fatigue settling deep in her bones, the emotional drain of realizing that no one, not one person, could be fully relied upon. Even those closest to her, those she had counted on, were now potential threats or indifferent observers. The weight of betrayal pressed down like a physical force. Hours passed in quiet reflection. Each half-truth, each act of deception, compounded the isolation she felt. The loneliness was sharp, the emotional fatigue pervasive. She held herself upright, but only by a thread, her mind and body exhausted by the relentless reality that the network she thought she could trust was fractured beyond repair. The room, silent except for her own breathing, mirrored the emptiness she felt inside. Elizabeth pressed her hands again over her stomach, feeling the baby's small kicks as a reminder of why she had to endure this pain. The heartbreak dominated her, not strategy. For now, there were no plans, no maps, no calculated moves. Only the raw, quiet understanding that she was profoundly alone, and the people she had once leaned on could not be relied upon. A message appeared on her phone. A secret meeting had been scheduled between Vivian and key investors that could strip Elizabeth of both credibility and legal authority. The emotional weight of betrayal pressed further, confirming that the isolation she felt was only going to intensify. If you've ever felt pushed to the edge, only to realize the fight isn't over, this is the moment where Elizabeth Harper begins to pull herself back, one small piece at a time. Elizabeth sat at her desk, pressing her hands gently over her belly. The baby kicked softly, grounding her in the middle of the storm. The weeks of betrayal and isolation weighed on her chest, but she noticed something. A small, almost imperceptible detail that didn't line up. One report had been sent to the wrong file, a clause slightly altered in a way that could work in her favor if she paid attention. It was nothing dramatic, but it made her chest tighten. Not from victory, but from the tiniest flicker of hope. She let herself breathe slowly. The humiliation, the heartbreak, and the exhaustion were still there, lingering like shadows along her spine. Elizabeth wasn't calculating yet. She was noticing, feeling, adjusting. Her eyes traced the page in front of her, noting the tiny inconsistency, the one small mistake that could give her a foothold. It wasn't a confirmation that anything would change. She wasn't sure yet. It could mean nothing, or it could mean everything. Her hands rested lightly over her belly, stroking it almost instinctively. The baby's movement reminded her why she had to endure this. Fear and protectiveness mingled with cautious curiosity. A part of her wanted to throw herself into immediate action, but the larger, quieter voice inside whispered patience. The tiny discrepancy was her first chance, but she had to wait, to watch, to let the moment reveal its weight. Elizabeth leaned back, letting herself feel the fatigue in her shoulders. The world outside the office remained indifferent, unaware of the subtle shifts happening within the empire. She whispered softly, "I can't let this break us." The words were for the baby as much as for herself, a quiet acknowledgement that she was still here, still human, still capable of noticing, still capable of holding on to small sparks even amid the wreckage. Her mind drifted back to the betrayal and the isolation she had endured. Friends who promised loyalty, colleagues who smiled while undermining her. The quiet moments of humiliation that had left her stomach tight and breath shallow. It was still raw, still painful, but now there was a seed of focus, a flicker that maybe, just maybe, things could shift. She opened a secure file on her laptop. One document caught her eye, partial, confusing, incomplete. It was only a few lines, a name she didn't expect, a clause that made her pause. Not a solution, not a clean path forward. Just enough to make her lean closer, eyes narrowed, heart pounding, knowing that the fight wasn't over. The path would be messy, slow, uncertain, but it existed. Elizabeth pressed her hands against her belly once more, taking a slow breath. She was still tired, still shaken, still carrying the hurt of weeks of betrayal, but she wasn't completely defeated. The small win, the one partial document, was enough to remind her that the system wasn't infallible, that she was not entirely powerless. The progress would be messy, uncertain, and incomplete, but it was real. A partial email, an unexpected name in a confidential folder, made Elizabeth pause. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't sure what it meant yet, but for the first time in weeks, the smallest flicker of cautious hope surged through her. The battle was far from over, and Elizabeth Harper was just beginning to understand that even amidst hurt and exhaustion, she still had the capacity to push back. If you've ever watched someone's confidence wobble after holding power for too long, this moment will feel like tension in every nerve. Vivian Cross finally feels the first real crack in her armor. Elizabeth had sent a carefully timed email, a single attachment to a select board member. She waited quietly, not looking for drama, only observing. And then it happened. Vivian's hand froze mid-flip of a file, fingers hovering in the air as if unsure. Her lips pressed tighter. Her eyes flicked to the assistant who asked a question she had already answered twice. For a moment, the carefully composed mask slipped. A tiny, human crack, but unmistakable. The board member she had targeted shifted in their chair, eyebrows knitting slightly, just enough for Elizabeth to see a subtle reaction. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic. One reaction was enough to signal the start of unease. The room's energy changed, faintly, almost imperceptibly, but to Elizabeth it was electric. Vivian's meetings ran longer than usual that day. Her answers became careful, measured in a way that hadn't happened in months. The aura of effortless control that had surrounded her for so long wavered, and though no one else could pinpoint it, she felt it. Her confidence, the foundation she had relied on to project power, had been subtly shaken. Elizabeth watched silently from her side of the empire, feeling satisfaction, not glee. She didn't need a cascade of reactions, multiple confirmations, or a dramatic fall. One tiny human slip was enough. A hand frozen over a document, a brief hesitation from a board member. These were the first signs that the balance could tilt. And for the first time, the mistress who had seemed untouchable felt unsafe, even if she didn't yet understand why. Vivian's shoulders stiffened as she returned to her chair. The careful composure she projected wavered for a few seconds longer than usual. Her assistant, sensing tension, remained quiet. Elizabeth didn't act. She didn't have to. The human crack, a subtle stumble, a pause in authority, carried its own weight. The tension in the room grew, quiet but undeniable. No dramatic gestures, no speeches, no grand displays. Just the subtle human reaction that Elizabeth had been waiting for. It was proof that even the strongest armor could develop a weakness. And this one small crack was the start of something that could grow. Later, Elizabeth noticed an almost imperceptible shift in Vivian. She knew something was wrong, a subtle sense of unease in her gestures and tone, but she didn't know what or why. The mistress, once untouchable, was finally feeling unsafe. One overlooked decision can tip a seemingly secure empire. Elizabeth Harper is about to witness the cracks in Gregory Stanton's control and feel the first shift in her favor. Elizabeth's eyes stayed fixed on the morning reports scattered across her desk. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. The baby stirred lightly, and a pulse of protectiveness ran through her. Weeks of humiliation, betrayal, and isolation had left her raw, but now she noticed a tangible error. A critical account Gregory had approved without reviewing. A minor signature missing. A date misaligned. One small blind spot visible and concrete. She pressed her lips together, holding her breath, feeling the tension in her chest. Gregory paced in his office, unaware of the oversight. He had signed off on a merger clause he didn't read carefully, trusting routine procedures instead of scrutiny. Elizabeth knew immediately this could be leveraged, but she didn't act yet. Instead, she leaned back, letting herself feel the subtle relief of finally seeing the world's machinery falter under its own weight. It wasn't a system failure. It was human. Vivian sat across from Gregory, her usual composure intact, but Elizabeth noticed a tiny hesitation. Her hand froze mid-flip of a file, fingers hovering for a moment. Her lips pressed tighter, eyes flicking to her assistant, who repeated a question she had already answered. A small, human crack, but unmistakable. The aura of control that had surrounded her for months now wavered ever so slightly. Elizabeth allowed herself a small, private smile, letting awareness settle in. She wasn't aggressive, wasn't triumphant in a showy way. One subtle, human misstep was enough to shift the tension, and for the first time, Elizabeth felt her chest lift slightly, the tight knot of fear loosening. She had endured, survived, and quietly reclaimed a piece of agency. The board's attention lingered on the hesitation. One subtle reaction, a tiny pause in response to the report she had sent earlier, enough to make her realize the balance was beginning to tip. She wasn't sure yet how far it would go. Could mean nothing, or everything. Elizabeth pressed her hands lightly on the desk, feeling the steady pulse of cautious hope. She had not won yet. She didn't need to be cruel. She didn't need to humiliate anyone. She had survived. She had endured. And now, in these small human imperfections around her, she began to sense the first signs that the empire could bend without her raising a finger. The partial document, the tiny hesitation, the human misstep, all hinted at leverage she could later use. Elizabeth exhaled slowly. She felt relief, dignity, and a quiet sense of power that didn't demand cruelty. For the first time since the betrayal, she realized she could win without becoming someone she wasn't meant to be. If you've ever felt betrayed or quietly pushed aside, this story might feel familiar. Stay with Elizabeth and notice the small choices, the quiet moments, and the tiny victories that slowly make her stronger. And if her journey touches something personal in you, share this story with someone who might understand. Her story isn't over yet. Elizabeth found her way forward, but the memory of being cast aside never really disappears. So I want to ask you something honestly. Have you ever stayed silent to protect yourself, even when your heart wanted to speak? And if it had been your life, and someone you loved depended on your choice, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments.